They found her boots first, waterlogged, caked in mud, sitting on a flat rock beside a stream that didn't appear on any official trail map. The laces were still tied. That's what haunted the search and rescue team the most. The laces were still tied, which meant she had slipped them off carefully, methodically, as if she planned to put them back on, as if she thought she had time. But Sarah Mitchell never put those boots back on. And for 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days, nobody knew why. My name is on the channel you're watching right now, and what I'm about to tell you is the complete, unfiltered account of how modern technology, old-fashioned detective work, and one person's refusal to give up cracked open a case that law enforcement had quietly shelved as another tragic statistic. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, the Appalachian Trail, and the digital breadcrumbs that led investigators to a truth nobody saw coming. Before we go any further into this rabbit hole of mystery, forensic technology, and heartbreak, I need 3 things from you right now. First, smash that like button if you believe that every missing person deserves answers, no matter how long it takes. Second, drop a comment below telling me if you've ever hiked the Appalachian Trail or if you know someone who has, because this story will change how you think about wilderness safety forever. And third, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications, because the cases I cover don't make it to your evening news, but they should. These are the stories that need to be told, and I need you here to make sure they reach the people who need to hear them most. Now, let's go back to where this all began. April 17th, 2019, Springer Mountain, Georgia, the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, where every year thousands of hikers begin their journey northward toward Mount Katahdin in Maine, 2,190 miles away. It's a pilgrimage of sorts, a test of endurance, a chance to disconnect from the chaos of modern life and reconnect with something primal and true. At least, that's what the brochures say. That's what Sarah Mitchell believed when she signed the trail register that sunny Thursday morning. Her handwriting neat and optimistic in the weather-beaten logbook that sat in a wooden box at the trailhead. Sarah was 28 years old, a graduate student at the University of North Carolina, working on her master's degree in environmental science, 5 feet 6 inches tall, about 132 pounds, with auburn hair she usually kept in a practical braid, green eyes that her mother said could spot a rare bird from half a mile away, and a smile that made strangers feel like old friends. She wasn't an inexperienced hiker. She'd done sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, had spent summers working for the National Park Service, had taken wilderness survival courses, and knew how to read topographic maps, filter water, identify edible plants, and build an emergency shelter. She was prepared. She was cautious. She was smart. And she vanished. The first 48 hours, nobody worried. Sarah had told her roommate, her parents, and her academic advisor that she was planning a 2-week solo section hike from Springer Mountain to the Nantahala Outdoor Center, while roughly 137 miles through Georgia and into North Carolina. She'd done solo hikes before. She carried a satellite messenger device, the kind that lets you send preset messages to emergency contacts even when you're completely off the grid. She checked in on day 1, a simple message that said, "Made it to Hawk Mountain Shelter. Beautiful day. All good." Her mother, Linda Mitchell, received that message at 7:43 in the evening and went to bed relieved, proud of her daughter's independence and courage. Day 2, no message. But that wasn't alarming. Sometimes hikers get caught up in the experience, forget to check in, or can't get a clear view of the sky for the satellite signal. Day 3, still nothing. Linda called Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She told herself not to panic. Yes, Sarah was an adult. She was capable. She was fine. Day 4, Linda Mitchell called the Fannin County Sheriff's Department in Georgia. The initial response was what you'd expect. A missing person report was filed. Sarah's description was circulated. Park rangers were notified. But here's the thing about the Appalachian Trail that most people don't understand until something goes wrong. It's not one unified jurisdiction. The trail passes through 14 states, 6 national parks, 8 national forests, and crosses land managed by dozens of different agencies, not to mention hundreds of miles of private property. Coordinating a search across that patchwork of authority is like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the musicians don't speak the same language and the other half aren't sure they're playing the same song. The first organized search focused on the section between Hawk Mountain Shelter, where Sarah had sent her last message, and the next logical destination, which would have been either Gooch Mountain Shelter or Woody Gap, depending on her pace and preference. Search and rescue teams combed that section. They found nothing. No sign of her, no evidence that she'd passed through. It was as if she had simply stepped off the trail and dissolved into the forest. Week 2 of the search expanded the radius. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras flew grid patterns over the dense canopy. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through underbrush. Dogs trained to detect human scent worked themselves into exhaustion. They found abandoned campsites, scattered gear from other hikers, the bones of a deer. Yet 2 illegal marijuana grows that led to unrelated arrests and countless pieces of trash that people had dumped in the wilderness because apparently some humans are garbage. But no Sarah Mitchell. By week 3, the official search was scaled back, not called off entirely, but reduced to a skeleton crew. The reality of search and rescue operations is brutal and pragmatic. Resources are finite, other emergencies demand attention, and at some point, the statistical likelihood of finding someone alive drops to a percentage that makes it difficult to justify the expense and manpower. The case wasn't closed. Sarah Mitchell remained on missing person databases. Her family hired private investigators. Hiking communities on social media kept her photo circulating. But the intensive all-hands-on-deck operation wound down. Boone and the forest kept its secrets. Linda Mitchell did not accept this. She couldn't. She wouldn't. She became the kind of advocate that law enforcement agencies simultaneously respect and dread. Informed, persistent, unwilling to be placated with bureaucratic language and procedural explanations. She learned everything there was to know about search and rescue protocols. She studied maps until she could close her eyes and see the topography. She joined hiking forums, became a fixture in missing persons communities, and most importantly, she became an expert in something that would eventually crack this case wide open. Digital forensics. See, Sarah Mitchell might have been hiking in the wilderness, might have been seeking that disconnect from modern life, but she was still a child of the digital age. She carried her smartphone, even though she knew there would be long stretches without cellular service. She had the satellite messenger. She wore a fitness tracker on her wrist that logged her steps, her heart rate, her elevation changes. And all of these devices, even when they're not actively communicating, are collecting data, storing information, creating what investigators call digital exhaust, the trail of electronic breadcrumbs that we leave behind simply by existing in a world saturated with technology. The problem was accessing that data, and more importantly, understanding it. Linda Mitchell spent the first year after her daughter's disappearance learning how to read metadata, how to interpret GPS coordinates, how to file subpoenas for records from technology companies, and how to navigate the labyrinthine privacy policies that these companies hide behind. She wasn't a lawyer, she wasn't a technologist. She was a high school English teacher from Wilmington, North Carolina, who loved her daughter more than she loved sleep, comfort, or her own sanity. She contacted the company that manufactured Sarah's satellite messenger. They provided the last known transmission data, latitude 34.7389 degrees north, longitude 83.9872 degrees west, transmitted at 1943 hours on April 17th. That positioned Sarah at approximately the Hawk Mountain Shelter, exactly where she said she was. But the device never transmitted again. Either it was turned off, the battery died, it was damaged, or something prevented it from acquiring a satellite signal. Linda contacted Sarah's cellular provider. They provided cell tower data showing that Sarah's phone last pinged a tower near Suches, Georgia, at 2217 hours on April 17th. That was roughly 5 miles northeast of Hawk Mountain Shelter. The phone never connected again. Linda stared at that information for hours, days, trying to understand what it meant. Why would Sarah have hiked 5 miles in the dark? The trail shelters fill up fast during peak season, and hikers often push past their intended stopping point if a shelter is full. But 5 miles after dark? That was unusual. That was inconsistent with Sarah's cautious nature. Linda contacted the fitness tracker company. This is where things got complicated. The device Sarah wore synced data to her phone via Bluetooth, and then the phone uploaded that data to cloud servers when it had an internet connection. But if the phone lost connectivity before it could upload, the data sat trapped in the device's local memory. The company explained that they couldn't access that data remotely. It was encrypted. It was protected. It required physical possession of the device, which meant someone had to find it. Month 6, Linda Mitchell refinanced her house to hire a specialized search team. Not your typical search and rescue volunteers, but a group of former military personnel who did high-risk extractions and recovery operations in hostile environments. They were expensive, they were thorough, and they were willing to search areas that official teams had deemed too dangerous or too unlikely. They spent 3 weeks in the mountains. They found her backpack. It was wedged between 2 rocks in a ravine approximately 8 miles northeast of Hawk Mountain Shelter, significantly off the marked trail. The backpack was weather damaged but intact. Inside, a water filter, a camp stove, fuel canisters, a first aid kit, a journal with entries dated up to April 17th, spare clothing, energy bars, and a Ziploc bag containing her identification, credit cards, and emergency cash. What wasn't inside? Her phone, her satellite messenger, or her fitness tracker? The journal entries were heartbreaking in their mundanity. Sarah wrote about the weather, about her sore feet, about a section hiker from Ohio who shared his trail mix with her, about the way the light looked coming through the trees at dawn. The last entry was dated April 17th and simply said, Hawk Mountain. Met some thru hikers. Good energy. Gonna push a bit further tonight. Perfect hiking weather. That was it. No indication of distress, no hint of what was coming. The discovery of the backpack triggered a new search operation, concentrated on the ravine area and the surrounding terrain. They found nothing else for 3 days. Then on the 4th day, a volunteer spotted something metallic glinting in afternoon sunlight about 40 yards downslope from where the backpack was found. It was her camp stove, dented and partially buried in leaf litter. And 15 feet beyond that, they found a single hiking pole, snapped in half. The pattern was becoming clear. Sarah had fallen, or climbed down, or somehow ended up in terrain that was steep, treacherous, and unforgiving. The search intensified in that specific area. They brought in technical rescue climbers, people who could safely navigate the kind of vertical terrain where one wrong step means a fatal tumble. And that's when they found the boots. Sitting on that rock beside a stream that appeared on no official map, laces still tied, positioned as if their owner intended to return for them. Year 2. The investigation had gone cold in the official sense. The sheriff's department kept the case open, but active leads had evaporated. The private search team had exhausted their contract and moved on to other jobs. Linda Mitchell was drowning in debt and despair. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She went back to the digital data. She became obsessed with those missing devices. The phone, the satellite messenger, the fitness tracker. They were out there somewhere. And if she could find them, if she could access their data, maybe she could understand what happened in those hours between Sarah's last check-in and her disappearance. She hired a different kind of specialist, not a search and rescue expert, but a forensic geographer. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb, and he worked primarily with law enforcement agencies on criminal cases, using geographic profiling and spatial analysis to predict where evidence might be found. He'd helped locate murder weapons, buried remains, and in one famous case, a kidnapping victim who'd been held in a bunker hidden in state park land. Linda found him through a podcast about cold cases. She emailed him Sarah's story. He agreed to look at the case pro bono because, in his words, the data structure is fascinating. And I can't stop thinking about those boots. They found her boots first, waterlogged, caked in mud, sitting on a flat rock beside a stream that didn't appear on any official trail map. The laces were still tied. That's what haunted the search and rescue team the most. The laces were still tied, which meant she had slipped them off carefully, methodically, as if she planned to put them back on, as if she thought she had time. But Sarah Mitchell never put those boots back on. And for 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days, nobody knew why. My name is on the channel you're watching right now, and what I'm about to tell you is the complete, unfiltered account of how modern technology old-fashioned detective work, and one person's refusal to give up cracked open a case that law enforcement had quietly shelved as another tragic statistic. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, the Appalachian Trail, and the digital breadcrumbs that led investigators to a truth nobody saw coming. Before we go any further into this rabbit hole of mystery, forensic technology, and heartbreak, I need three things from you right now. First, smash that like button if you believe that every missing person deserves answers, no matter how long it takes. Second, drop a comment below telling me if you've ever hiked the Appalachian Trail or if you know someone who has, because this story will change how you think about wilderness safety forever. And third, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications, because the cases I cover don't make it to your evening news, but they should. These are the stories that need to be told, and I need you here to make sure they reach the people who need to hear them most. Now, let's go back to where this all began. Dr. Webb started with a fundamental question. If Sarah removed her boots and left them by that stream, where was she going? People don't take off their hiking boots in the wilderness without a reason. Reasons include crossing water and wanting to keep the boots dry, foot injuries that make wearing boots painful, or removing them to shake out debris. But Sarah's boots weren't near a crossing point. The stream was shallow and narrow, easily crossed without removing footwear. And if she'd had a foot injury severe enough to require removing boots, why not put on camp shoes? Hikers carry lightweight camp shoes for exactly this purpose. Sarah's camp shoes were in her backpack, which left one possibility. She removed her boots because she couldn't wear them anymore. Now, because she was injured in a way that made wearing them impossible or excruciating. Dr. Webb examined topographic maps of the area, overlaying them with satellite imagery, trail data, and the known location of Sarah's backpack, camp stove, hiking pole, and boots. He created a three-dimensional model of the terrain using LiDAR data, a laser-based technology that can map ground features even under dense forest canopy. And he started to see a pattern that previous searches had missed. The ravine where Sarah's backpack was found wasn't just a random ravine. It was part of a larger geological feature, a fault line that created a network of steep drainages and hidden gorges throughout that section of the mountains. Water flowed down these drainages during rain events, carving deeper channels, creating waterfalls, pools, and caves in the softer rock. And these features were often invisible from above, hidden by vegetation, only apparent when you were literally standing at the edge of them. Dr. Webb hypothesized that Sarah had either fallen into one of these drainages or had deliberately climbed down, perhaps thinking she could follow it to easier terrain or to a water source. Once in the drainage, she would have been funneled downslope by the topography, potentially traveling much farther than searchers had anticipated. And if she'd been injured in a fall, she might have been trying to self-rescue, following the water downstream, because that's what survival training teaches. Follow water, it leads to civilization eventually. But this particular drainage system didn't lead to civilization. It led deeper into a wilderness area that was rarely visited, yet had no maintained trails, and was notorious among experienced hikers as a place where people got turned around and lost. Dr. Webb identified 7 locations within that drainage system where he believed Sarah's devices might be located, based on terrain features that would cause someone traveling injured and disoriented to stop. Natural shelters, flat areas beside water, or obstacles that would require a decision about whether to continue. Linda Mitchell took this information to the Fannin County Sheriff's Department. They were skeptical, but willing to look. A small team returned to the area with Dr. Webb's coordinates programmed into their GPS units. They searched 5 of the 7 locations over 2 days. Found nothing. The team was ready to call it and mark this as another dead-end theory. But Linda begged them to check the remaining 2 locations. She offered to pay for an additional day of their time. The sheriff himself, a man named Gerald Hodges, who'd been personally bothered by this case since day one, agreed to go himself. He took 2 deputies, a volunteer with technical climbing experience, and Dr. Webb. They hiked in at dawn on a Tuesday morning in October, 2 years and 6 months after Sarah Mitchell disappeared. Location 6 was a small cave, barely large enough to crawl into, formed where water had eroded softer rock behind a harder granite outcropping. The opening was partially obscured by rhododendron, a thick mountain plant that grows in impenetrable tangles. They almost missed it. But Dr. Webb insisted they check, so one of the deputies got on his hands and knees and shined a flashlight inside. Oh, and there she was. Sarah Mitchell had crawled into that cave and she had never come out. Her body was in a fetal position, her arms wrapped around herself, her head resting on what appeared to be wadded-up clothing she'd used as a pillow. She'd been dead for more than 2 years, but the cave's cool, dry environment had preserved her remains better than anyone expected. She was still wearing her hiking clothes, and clutched in her right hand, pressed against her chest, was her cell phone. The medical examiner determined that Sarah had died from a combination of injuries and exposure. She'd suffered a significant fall at some point, breaking her left ankle and sustaining a head injury that likely caused a concussion. She'd managed to travel approximately 3/4 of a mile from the point of the fall, an extraordinary feat given her injuries, before finding the cave and taking shelter. Evidence suggested she'd survived in the cave for at least 24 to 36 hours before succumbing to her injuries, dehydration, and hypothermia as temperatures dropped during the night. But here's what made Sarah Mitchell's story different from so many other tragic hiking accidents. Here's what transformed this from a cautionary tale about wilderness dangers into a criminal investigation. When forensic technicians extracted the data from Sarah's phone, from the fitness tracker they found still strapped to her wrist, and from the satellite messenger they discovered in a jacket pocket, they uncovered something that nobody expected. Sarah Mitchell didn't get lost. She was running. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The fitness tracker data told a story that made Dr. Webb go pale when he first saw it. Sarah's heart rate on the evening of April 17th had been steady and moderate, consistent with hiking, until 2200 hours. At that point, her heart rate spiked dramatically. 140 beats per minute, 160, 172. This wasn't exertion, this was terror. And her movement data showed she was moving fast, running at times based on the cadence and stride length the algorithm calculated. The phone's accelerometer data corroborated this. Sarah had been moving rapidly, with sudden changes in direction, for approximately 47 minutes. Then the data showed what could only be interpreted as a fall. A sudden violent change in orientation, followed by impact signatures, followed by erratic, slower movement. She'd gotten up from that fall and kept moving, but her pace had decreased significantly. The GPS data, though intermittent due to the heavy tree cover, showed her veering sharply off the trail and heading northeast into terrain that became increasingly rugged. But it was the audio data that broke the case wide open. Sarah's phone had a voice-activated recording app that she sometimes used to make voice notes about plants or wildlife she observed during hikes. The app had been triggered 5 times on the evening of April 17th. The recordings were short, the audio quality poor due to wind noise and Sarah's heavy breathing. But forensic audio specialists cleaned them up enough to hear what Sarah had been saying, or more accurately, what she'd been hearing. The first recording, time-stamped at 2153 hours. "Someone's following me. I've seen the same headlamp behind me for the last 20 minutes. Every time I stop, they stop. I'm going to leave the trail at the next opportunity." The second recording, 2207 hours. "He's still there. He's not even trying to hide it anymore, just staying about 50 yards back. I can hear him. I'm going to run." The third recording, 2219 hours. This one was just breathing. Heavy, panicked breathing. And in the background, barely audible, the sound of someone moving through underbrush. Someone close. The fourth recording, 2241 hours. "I fell. I think my ankle is broken. He's getting closer. I can hear him calling out, saying he just wants to help, but I don't believe him. I don't believe him. If anyone finds this, my name is Sarah Mitchell. Tell my mom I love her. Tell her I tried." The fifth recording, 2303 hours. Silence for several seconds. Then Sarah's voice, barely a whisper. "He gave up, or I lost him. I can't hear anything anymore. I can't walk. I need help." That was the last recording. Sarah had crawled into that cave, had tried to use her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. She'd tried to send a message on her satellite messenger, but by that point her injuries and mental state were such that she couldn't remember how to operate it correctly. Or perhaps the device had been damaged in the fall. The fitness tracker had continued logging her vital signs until her heart stopped beating at approximately 0432 hours on April 19th. She'd been alone in that cave for nearly 30 hours, injured, frightened, and slowly dying. Sheriff Hodges initiated a criminal investigation immediately. The question was simple and terrible. Who was following Sarah Mitchell through the woods that night? Who was the person whose presence frightened her so badly that she left the safety of the trail and ran into dangerous terrain in the dark? And most importantly, did that person know they'd caused her death? The investigation focused on the Appalachian Trail hiking community, specifically on people who were known to be hiking that section during the same time frame. When the trail registers from shelters before and after Hawk Mountain were examined, social media posts were analyzed. Hikers who'd signed registers near Sarah's last known locations were tracked down and interviewed. This process took months. The Appalachian Trail sees millions of visitors every year, and during peak season, hundreds of people per day pass through popular sections. Finding everyone who was in that area on April 17th was like trying to identify individual raindrops in a storm. But investigators caught a break. A hiker who'd been at Hawk Mountain Shelter on April 17th came forward after seeing news coverage about Sarah's body being found. His name was Trevor Holloway, a 24-year-old from Pennsylvania doing a through hike. He remembered Sarah because she'd been friendly. She had shared her campsite space when the shelter filled up, had talked to several hikers about the best water sources in the upcoming section. Trevor had taken photos at the shelter that evening, and when he provided those photos to investigators, one of them showed something interesting in the background. A man, sitting alone at the edge of the clearing, not interacting with the group, just watching. His face was partially obscured by a hat and the angle of the shot, but his posture, his body language, everything about him screamed isolation and intention. Trevor didn't remember much about the man, just that he'd been quiet, that he'd left the shelter area around dark, heading north on the trail. That something about him had felt off in a way Trevor couldn't articulate. Forensic image specialists enhanced the photo. They couldn't get a clear enough image for facial recognition, but they could determine approximate height and build, clothing details, and the brand of backpack the man carried. It was a start. Investigators cross-referenced this information with trail registers, with gear store records from nearby towns, with every piece of data they could find. And then they got lucky. Or rather, they got smart. Dr. Webb suggested they look at something that nobody had considered: commercial GPS tracking data. See, there are companies that collect location data from millions of smartphones for advertising and analytics purposes. This data is supposedly anonymized, but it's incredibly detailed. It can show not just where people are, but where they've been, how long they stayed, what routes they traveled. Doctor. Webb knew that several companies had contracts with outdoor recreation app developers. And if Sarah had any of those apps on her phone, there might be data not just about her movements, but about other phones that were in proximity to hers. The legal process to obtain this data was complex. It required warrants, subpoenas, and court orders. It took 8 months, but eventually investigators got access to a data set that showed every registered mobile device that was within a 2-mile radius of the trail between Springer Mountain and Neal's Gap on April 17th. There were 73 devices. Most moved in predictable patterns, following the trail, stopping at shelters or campsites. But one device showed something different. This device, later identified as belonging to a phone registered to a Paul Hendricks of Asheville, owned North Carolina, showed movement that tracked with Sarah's for nearly 6 hours. When her device moved north on the trail, his moved north. When her device stopped at Hawk Mountain Shelter, his stopped approximately 100 yards away. When her device left the trail at 2200 hours, his followed. When her device showed the erratic running pattern, his showed pursuit. The correlation was undeniable. Someone had been following Sarah Mitchell, and that someone was Paul Hendricks. The background check on Paul Hendricks revealed a history that made the hair on the back of Sheriff Hodges' neck stand up. Hendricks was 42 years old. He'd been arrested twice for stalking, once in North Carolina and once in Tennessee. Both cases had been pled down to misdemeanor harassment. He'd been fired from a job at an outdoor equipment retailer for making female customers uncomfortable. He had no fixed address, but was known to frequent hiking trails and campgrounds throughout the Appalachian region. And when investigators dug deeper, they found social media accounts where Hendricks had posted hundreds of photos of women hiking, often taken from a distance, often without the subject's knowledge. The accounts had been reported and taken down multiple times, but Hendricks kept creating new ones. Finding Hendricks became the priority. But it wasn't easy. He'd been essentially living off the grid, working cash jobs, staying at campgrounds, moving frequently. He didn't have a permanent residence. His phone was no longer active. He'd gotten rid of it months earlier, but investigators knew he had a pattern. He frequented certain areas. He returned to trails he knew. They set up surveillance at popular trailheads. They notified park rangers and trail maintainers to be on the lookout. And they waited. 5 months later, a park ranger at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park called the tip line. A man matching Hendricks's description had been reported by multiple hikers for following women on trails. The ranger had made contact with the man, had run his identification, and confirmed it was Paul Hendricks. He was arrested on an outstanding warrant for a parole violation related to one of his previous stalking convictions. The interview room footage from Hendricks's interrogation is chilling. He was calm, almost bored. When confronted with the GPS data showing that he'd followed Sarah Mitchell, he didn't deny it. He said he'd been hiking the same trail, that it was a coincidence, that people hike at similar paces all the time. When asked why his movement data showed him stopping when she stopped, pursuing when she ran, he shrugged and said the data must be wrong, that technology makes mistakes. When investigators told him that Sarah was dead, that she'd been found in a cave with evidence that she'd been running from someone, that her phone contained audio recordings of her terror, something changed in his expression. Not guilt, not remorse, something else. He leaned forward and said, "I never touched her. I never even talked to her. I just wanted to see where she'd go. I just wanted to watch." That statement, that admission, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Because under the laws of multiple states, if your actions directly and foreseeably cause someone's death, even if you never physically touch them, you can be charged with manslaughter or even murder depending on your intent and the circumstances. The prosecutor argued that Paul Hendricks had engaged in a pattern of predatory behavior, that he'd deliberately terrorized Sarah Mitchell, that he'd pursued her with the knowledge that she was frightened, and that his actions had directly caused her to flee into terrain where she sustained fatal injuries. The defense argued that Hendricks had done nothing illegal by hiking on a public trail, that Sarah's decision to leave the trail was her own choice, that her death was a tragic accident but not a crime. They argued that you can't hold someone criminally responsible for another person's fear-based decisions. That if Sarah had stayed on the trail, called for help from other hikers, or waited until daylight to continue, she would have survived. That Hendricks' presence, however unsettling, did not rise to the level of criminal culpability for her death. The trial lasted 3 weeks. It featured testimony from forensic geographers, digital forensics experts, psychologists who specialized in predatory behavior, and hikers who'd encountered Hendricks on various trails and described his unsettling pattern of following women. The audio recordings of Sarah's voice, scared and desperate, were played in court. Jurors listened to a young woman describe her terror in real time, knowing that hours later she would be dead. Several jurors cried. One had to be excused because they couldn't continue serving. The jury deliberated for 4 days. The verdict came back, guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced Paul Hendricks to 15 years in prison. It wasn't murder. It wasn't as much time as Sarah's family wanted. But it was something. It was accountability. It was recognition that what Hendricks had done, even though he'd never laid a hand on Sarah Mitchell, had killed her as surely as if he'd pushed her off that cliff himself. But the story doesn't end there, because Sarah Mitchell's case revealed something that the outdoor recreation community had been quietly aware of but reluctant to confront. The Appalachian Trail, like many wilderness areas, had a problem with predatory behavior. Women hiking alone reported being followed, harassed, and stalked far more frequently than official statistics suggested. But many incidents went unreported because victims didn't know who to report to, didn't think anything would be done, or felt that their concerns would be dismissed as paranoia or misunderstanding social norms in the hiking community. Sarah's mother, Linda Mitchell, used the attention surrounding the case to advocate for better safety measures on long-distance trails. She pushed for more frequent ranger patrols, better cellular coverage on popular sections, emergency call boxes at shelters, and most importantly, a cultural shift in how the hiking community responds to women reporting uncomfortable or threatening behavior. She created a foundation in Sarah's name that provides satellite communication devices to hikers who can't afford them, offers self-defense training tailored to wilderness environments, and maintains a database where hikers can report and check for warnings about individuals who've engaged in harassing behavior on trails. The technology that helped solve Sarah's case has become more widespread. Many long-distance hikers now carry devices with more sophisticated tracking features, some that can send automatic alerts if the user stops moving for extended periods, or if the device detects a fall. Apps have been developed that allow hikers to share their real-time location with emergency contacts and to send quick distress signals. Some trail organizations have started implementing permit systems that create better records of who is using trails and when, making it easier to investigate incidents when they occur. But perhaps the most important legacy of Sarah Mitchell's case is that it forced a conversation about something we don't like to talk about: the fact that wild places, for all their beauty and healing power, are not always safe for everyone. That for women, people of color, LGBTQ individuals, and other marginalized groups, the experience of being in wilderness can be fundamentally different, shaped by concerns about personal safety that others might never consider. That the freedom and solitude we associate with hiking can quickly transform into isolation and vulnerability. Sarah Mitchell went into the mountains seeking peace, adventure, and connection with nature. What she found instead was a predator who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. She died alone, scared and in pain, in a cave that became her tomb. But the data she left behind, the digital trail that persisted after her voice fell silent, ensured that her story would be heard, that her death would mean something, that the person responsible would be held accountable. The boots are still there, by the way. After the investigation concluded, after the trial ended, Linda Mitchell hiked to that stream with a park ranger and a stonemason. They built a small memorial cairn, a stack of stones in a tradition as old as hiking itself, marking a place where someone fell. They placed Sarah's boots at the base of the cairn, and on a bronze plaque fixed to the largest stone, they inscribed Sarah's name, her dates, and a line from her trail journal. "The mountains are calling, and I must go. I will return with stories." She didn't return, not the way she planned, but her story came back. Well, and it matters. It matters because every year, more than 300 people go missing in national parks and wilderness areas across the United States. Some are found quickly, some are found years later, some are never found at all. Each one is somebody's daughter, somebody's son, somebody's loved one who walked into the trees and didn't come back. And for their families, for the people who wait and search and refuse to give up hope, stories like Sarah's matter because they prove that even when someone is gone, even when the trail goes cold, technology and determination and love can still bring answers. Dr. Marcus Webb now consults on dozens of missing hiker cases every year. He's developed a methodology that combines geographic profiling, digital forensics, and behavioral analysis to predict search areas with remarkable accuracy. He's helped locate 17 missing hikers since Sarah's case, 11 of them alive. He says that Sarah Mitchell taught him to look at terrain differently, to understand that the path someone takes when they're afraid is fundamentally different from the path they'd take otherwise. That fear rewrites the map. Sheriff Gerald Hodges retired 2 years after the trial. He said Sarah's case was the one that kept him up at night, the one he couldn't let go. He'd worked hundreds of cases in his career, but there was something about finding that young woman in the cave, about seeing her phone still clutched in her hand, about knowing she'd died trying to call for help that nobody could hear. He said if nothing else good came from his entire career, at least he'd been able to give Linda Mitchell answers. At least Sarah's story hadn't ended with a question mark. Linda Mitchell still hikes. She says some people find that strange, that the mountains took her daughter and yet she returns to them. But she says she understands now what Sarah loved about them, why she kept going back. The wilderness didn't kill Sarah. A person did. A person who chose to stalk and terrorize and drive her into terrain where her death became inevitable. The mountains were just where it happened. And Linda says she refuses to let Paul Hendricks take the mountains from her the way he took her daughter. So she hikes. She wears a satellite messenger. She carries a personal locator beacon. She hikes with groups when possible. And she carries Sarah's memory with her on every trail. Which to the fitness tracker that was on Sarah's wrist when she died is now in the possession of the forensic laboratory at the University of North Carolina. It's used in training sessions for law enforcement officers learning about digital evidence in missing person cases. Students study the heart rate data, the timeline of Sarah's last hours, the way the technology captured her final moments. It's teaching material. But Linda Mitchell likes to think it's more than that. She likes to think that Sarah is still teaching, still helping, still making a difference. The cave where Sarah died has been officially closed. Park Service workers installed a gate over the entrance, partly to preserve it as the location where human remains were found, and partly because it had become a macabre destination for people who wanted to see where the tragedy occurred. There's a sign now that directs hikers to the memorial cairn instead, asking them to respect the site and to remember that this is not a curiosity, but a place where someone died afraid and alone. Every year on April 17th, hikers who knew Sarah's story or who've been touched by it make a pilgrimage to the cairn. They leave flowers, notes, small tokens. Someone started a tradition of leaving a pair of hiking boots tied together as a symbol of completed journeys and the hikers who don't make it home. The cairn has grown over the years, banded by stones that visitors add, each one representing a prayer or a thought or a promise to hike more carefully, to watch out for each other, to remember that we're all vulnerable out there under the trees. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy now includes Sarah's story in their safety materials, not to scare people away from hiking, but to encourage awareness, preparation, and community responsibility. They emphasize that what happened to Sarah was rare, that millions of people hike safely every year, but that vigilance and caution are never wasted. They encourage hikers to trust their instincts, to report concerning behavior, to understand that politeness and social norms don't matter when your safety is at risk. Paul Hendricks sits in a North Carolina prison cell. He'll be eligible for parole in 9 years. He's given multiple interviews to journalists and researchers studying predatory behavior. In these interviews, he shows no remorse for Sarah's death, but he insists he did nothing wrong. He says he was simply hiking, that Sarah overreacted, that her death was an accident of her own making. Psychologists who've evaluated him describe him as having antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features, a person fundamentally incapable of empathy or genuine remorse. The parole board has already been petitioned by victims' advocacy groups to deny any early release. The general consensus is that Paul Hendricks remains dangerous and will likely reoffend if given the opportunity. The technology that helps solve Sarah's case continues to evolve. Newer fitness trackers include features specifically designed for safety, like automatic fall detection and emergency SOS functions. Some can detect unusual activity patterns and send automated alerts to emergency contacts. Still, satellite messengers have become more affordable and user-friendly. There are apps now that allow hikers to check in at regular intervals, with automatic alerts triggered if a check-in is missed. The outdoor recreation industry has recognized that safety technology isn't just a nice-to-have feature. It's an essential tool that can mean the difference between life and death. But technology alone isn't the answer. The hiking community has had to confront uncomfortable truths about gender dynamics, power, and vulnerability in outdoor spaces. Conversations that were once dismissed as overreacting or misunderstanding trail culture are now taken seriously. Men are being asked to examine their own behavior, to understand how actions that seem harmless to them might be threatening to others, was to actively work to make trails safer and more welcoming. Women are sharing their experiences more openly, building networks of support and information, refusing to be silent about harassment and stalking that they have experienced in wild places. There are more women hiking alone now than ever before, and many cite Sarah Mitchell's story as part of their motivation. Not to be reckless, but to refuse to be controlled by fear. To prepare thoroughly, hike smart, stay connected, and trust themselves. Sarah's death could have had a chilling effect, could have scared women away from solo hiking. Instead, it's created a movement of informed, prepared, communal wilderness engagement where people look out for each other and refuse to tolerate predatory behavior. The legal precedent set by Hendricks' conviction has been cited in other cases. Whilst prosecutors in several states have used similar arguments to charge individuals whose stalking or threatening behavior led to victims' deaths, even when there was no physical contact. Defense attorneys argue that this creates a slippery slope, that it's too broad an interpretation of causation. But courts have generally upheld the principle that if your intentional actions create a foreseeable risk of death and death occurs, you bear criminal responsibility. It's a developing area of law, and Sarah Mitchell's case is at the center of it. Linda Mitchell was asked in an interview what she would say to Sarah if she could speak to her one more time. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I'd tell her I'm proud of her, that even scared and hurt and dying, she thought to make those recordings. She thought about the evidence. Well, she thought about helping whoever might find her. That's who she was, a scientist to the end, someone who wanted to help, and she did help. She helped convict the man who killed her. She helped change policies that will save other hikers. She helped her mother understand that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes form." 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. That's how long Sarah Mitchell was missing. How long her family lived in agonizing uncertainty. How long her story remained untold. But digital breadcrumbs persisted in the darkness. GPS coordinates, heart rate data, accelerometer readings, voice recordings made in terror and hope, all of it waiting in silicon and storage, waiting to be found, waiting to speak when Sarah no longer could. This is what modern forensics looks like. Well, this is how we find the missing now. Not just with search dogs and helicopters, though those remain vital, but with data analysis and geographic profiling and the digital exhaust we create simply by existing in a connected world. Our phones track us. Our fitness devices log us. Our interactions leave traces. And when tragedy strikes, when someone vanishes into the wilderness, those traces can guide us home, or at least guide us to answers. Sarah Mitchell deserved to finish her hike. She deserved to complete those 137 miles, to reach the Nantahala Outdoor Center, to call her mother and tell her stories about the trail. She deserved to finish her master's degree, to build a career in environmental science, to hike 100 more trails in 100 more wild places. She deserved to grow old, to fall in love, but to live a full and complete life. Paul Hendricks took that from her. His obsession, his stalking, his refusal to leave her alone in the woods transformed her adventure into a nightmare, and her dream into her death. But he couldn't take her story. He couldn't silence the data. He couldn't erase the evidence of what he'd done. Technology and a mother's love and a community's determination made sure of that. Sarah Mitchell's voice echoes still in those recordings, in the heart rate data that captured her fear, in the GPS coordinates that tracked her desperate flight. She speaks through the memorial cairn and the boots left by the stream. She speaks through every hiker who's been made safer by the policies her death inspired. Yeah, she speaks through every woman who hikes alone and refuses to be afraid because Sarah's story taught her to be prepared instead. The Appalachian Trail runs 2,190 miles from Georgia to Maine. Millions have walked it. Thousands have completed it. It's a trail of transformation, challenge, beauty, and achievement. But it's also a trail where people have died, disappeared, and been victimized. Sarah Mitchell's story lives now as part of that trail's history, a reminder that wild places demand respect, that preparation saves lives, and that we all bear responsibility for making outdoor spaces safe for everyone who ventures into them. This is her story, the complete story. From the morning she signed the trail register with optimistic handwriting to the cave where she died alone to the courtroom where justice was finally served. From the boots by the stream to the data that convicted her killer. From a daughter's disappearance to a mother's crusade. from a cold case to a solved case, from a missing person to a found person, from silence to voice. Sarah Mitchell was here. She hiked these mountains, she loved these wild places, and when danger came for her, she fought. She ran, she documented, she tried. And though she didn't survive, her story did. Her evidence did. Her impact did. The fog still rolls in thick over the North Georgia mountains. It still hides things, but some things refuse to stay hidden. Some voices refuse to be silenced. And some truths fight their way to the surface no matter how deep they're buried. Technology gave Sarah Mitchell a voice beyond death. Love gave her a champion who wouldn't stop searching. Justice gave her a verdict that said her life mattered and her death was not an accident but a crime. Her boots remain by the stream, a monument to a journey interrupted. But the trail continues. Other hikers pass, other stories unfold. And in the data streams and satellite signals and GPS coordinates that surround us all, other mysteries wait to be solved, other missing persons wait to be found, other voices wait to be heard. This was one case, one hiker, one tragedy. But it changed everything. It changed how we search, how we think about safety, how we understand that the digital trails we leave can outlast us, can speak for us, so can bring justice for us when we no longer can speak for ourselves. Sarah Mitchell's story is solved. The cold case is closed. But her legacy continues. Every hiker who carries a satellite messenger because of her story. Every woman who trusts her instincts because Sarah's recordings validated that fear is information. Every law enforcement officer who searches differently because of the techniques that found her. Every person who looks at their fitness tracker and realizes it's not just counting steps, but potentially saving lives. She was 28 years old. She had auburn hair and green eyes and a smile that made strangers feel welcome. She loved birds and plants and the way light looked through trees at dawn. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's classmate. She was a real person with dreams and plans and a future that should have been long and full. And she died because a predator decided his obsession mattered more than her safety. But Sarah Mitchell got the last word. Through technology and determination and love, she told us what happened. She identified her killer. She changed a system. She saved lives that will never know they were saved because the policies inspired by her death prevented their tragedies before they could unfold. This is true crime. This is the story of how we find the missing in the 21st century. This is the intersection of technology and tragedy, of data and determination, of wilderness and justice. This is Sarah Mitchell's story, and it matters. Thank you for watching this investigation through to the end. If this story moved you, if you believe that every missing person deserves the kind of determination that Linda Mitchell showed, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button and let the algorithm know that these stories matter, that cold cases deserve attention, that the missing deserve to be found. Second, share this video with someone who hikes, someone who loves the outdoors, someone who needs to understand that safety preparation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. And third, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I cover the cases that mainstream media ignores, the mysteries that law enforcement shelves, the stories of people who deserve to be remembered and deserve justice. There are more cases like Sarah's waiting to be told, more families waiting for answers, more mysteries where technology and determination might make the difference between a cold case and a closed case. I'll be here covering them. The question is, will you be here to listen? Subscribe now, because these stories need to be told, and the missing need to be found.